understanding the sun in the 10th house begins by understanding the sun and the 10th house. Let's start off by reviewing quickly the 10th house and what it symbolizes. As you can see, it is the area of sky which is directly overhead. That's the definition of the 10th house. And that physical reality is the reason why the 10th house symbolizes everything that it symbolizes. The area over your head, the open sky, is the most visible part of the sky. So the 10th house has to do with visibility. This is why it's the house of everything that pertains to extroversion or outwardness. So it's a house of masculinity, it's a house of the public, it's a house of society. In turn, this is why the 10th house is the house of fame. How visible are you? How well do people know you? What is your status in society? What is your career? What is your role in society? And finally, this is why it's a house of influence. Being up high, you have a lot of influence on things. You're very noticeable and you have a lot of power. So the 10th house shows us how much influence or how much authority, how much power we have. The open sky is not only visible, it's also quite windy. And this is why the 10th house represents movement and travel. In fact, the 10th house being very windy is not a very permanent place. When you look up in the sky, the things you see right now are not the same things that you'll see in an hour. So the 10th house signifies things which are not stable. It signifies instability. It signifies things that go away, dispersion or evaporation of things. Now, that kind of review that we just did for the 10th house, let's do the same thing for the sun. And then we'll be ready to talk about what the sun symbolizes when it's in this 10th house. The sun is the brightest planet. It has the most light, and that's why it symbolizes the soul. Because the soul is the quantum of awareness, and light is the agency of awareness. So the sun signifies awareness, light, which means visibility and vision. So it sounds kind of similar with the 10th house, visibility. So it symbolizes very similar things like the public, how extroversive you are, how outward you are, how masculine you are, how confident to go out, how much command or influence you have, how much authority and leadership. The soul is not only the quantum of awareness, but it's also the quantum of identity, because awareness is the focal point or the core of identity. Our identity is formed based on what we become aware of. So the sun represents the self, the seat of the identity. So it has to do with ego and self-esteem. And also it represents the seat or the core, the middle of anything. So it represents centrality and stability. So that's a little bit at odds with the 10th house, isn't it? And finally, the soul also has to do with the life force. The awareness is actually the animating factor. So the sun has to do with animation and vitality, life force. So it's the planet that symbolizes health. So now let's talk about what the sun symbolizes when it's in the 10th house. And the way that you sort that out is by looking for things about both the sun and the 10th house that are very, very similar or very, very diametrically opposite. So we already really have our finger on this pulse. We realize that the 10th house is all about visibility, and so is the sun. Because the sun and the 10th house are both pro-visibility, if you have the sun in the 10th house, the interpretation is very pro-visibility. So what does that exactly mean? It means the person probably has a lot of renown. Their name is known. They're a known person. People know who they are. And that kind of translates into career success, fame or notoriety, etc. And the other thing about visibility, as you remember from going over the sun and the second house, is that it also influences your power or influence over others. So if you have a lot of visibility, it means you're high up. If you're high up, that means you have a lot of power. So the sun in the 10th house indicates people that are powerful and therefore confident, assertive. Now, as I said, you want to not only look for where the planet and house are similar, you also want to look if there's anywhere that they're diametrically opposite. And we also have a case of that with the sun in the 10th house, because the sun is all about stability, centrality, and the 10th house is all about instability, wind, dispersion. If you put the two of these on a balance, you'll find the visibility sameness outweighs the stability dissimilarity. Because the visibility sameness is a deeper thing. The sun very deeply signifies light and visibility. And the 10th house, the open sky, very deeply signifies visibility. Whereas the stability thing is a derived symbolism. So the main quality of the sun in the 10th house is positive. It's mostly about the synergy of visibility. But there's a subtext to it which is negative, which is from the instability-stability clash. And the effect of that is that, yes, they have renowned career success. Yes, they're assertive and confidence. But very likely, they're not the stablest people. So therefore, they're probably giving up something in order to gain something else. They're probably giving up or sacrificing something to gain their notoriety or confidence. Or their notoriety and confidence might not be very enduring. There is the theory of what the sun in the 10th house represents. It's a very clear, good, simple theory. Let's see how it actually works in some actual birth charts. I have 4 on record with known reliable birth times. We have Sadhguru, Benito Mussolini, Bernard Madoff, and Vincent van Gogh. All 4 of these people have sun in 10th, but slightly different or vastly different conditions affect that sun in the 10th house, and hence you have slightly or vastly different people. So for example, Sadhguru, sun is in the 10th house in Virgo. So there's an intellectual flavor to his authority. There's an intellectual flavor to his leadership. There's a scholarly flavor to it, or a patient, painstaking, detail-oriented flavor to it. If the sun is in Virgo in the 10th house, that means that the sun is the 9th lord. 9th lord in the 10th house, 9th is the house of religion, philosophy, priests, teachers, gurus. So his famous, fame-making sun in the 10th house is the 9th lord. So it adds a religious or teachery flavor. Especially in Virgo, it adds like a teachery flavor to what he would be famous for. And on top of that, it's quite close to Mars. Mars is another very masculine planet. It's also going to do well in the 10th house. It's going to enhance this whole thing. Besides that, Mars is the 12th lord and the 5th lord. So the 12th lord is also explaining that it's not like a social type of religiosity that he's renowned for. It's more mystical religiosity. And the 5th lord, Mars being the 5th lord, means that the 5th and the 9th lord are joined as Mars and the sun in the 10th house. 5th and 9th lord joined in favorable conditions in the 10th house is amazingly fortuitous. And then on top of that, they're with Mercury. So Mercury is the 10th lord. So the sun and Mars are in the 10th house with the 10th lord, really accentuating. This sun in the 10th house is really accentuated. It's with another masculine planet, and it's with the 10th lord in the 10th house. And then, if you realize that the 5th lord is Mars and the 9th lord is the sun, and they're both with the 10th lord, then you realize you just got a mega Raja Yoga, which is a yoga which is very compatible with the sun being in the 10th house, because this yoga also confers that same effect of leadership, confidence, authority, etc. So here's a person with an extreme destiny for leadership as an intellectual and a mystical spiritualist. This thing about the instability that's potential with the sun in the 10th house doesn't really come out for him, A, because the sun is in such good conditions here, but B, especially because Mercury is also the 7th lord. The other house which is very unstable besides the 10th is the 7th. And so if you put the 7th lord in the 10th house, you have a synergy of instability. Synergy of instability would be interpreted as really good travel. So all in all, what he has going on in his 10th house is fame as an intellectual spiritualist all over the world, traveling far. His fame is traveling all over the place. However, you still see a hint of instability in that there's a strong break in his life. It's the pre-spiritual era of his life and the spiritual era of his life are quite different. Now, a chart which is less beautiful is Benito Mussolini's, as Benito Mussolini is also a less beautiful person than Sadhguru. He has the sun in the 10th house in Leo, so now that's masculine stuff is becoming the main backbone of the interpretation. He has the sun here with Mercury, similar to Sadhguru, but Sadhguru's Mercury was exalted here, and Sadhguru's Mercury is not combust. Sadhguru's Mercury was the 10th lord, but Mussolini's Mercury is the 8th lord. That leads us to just look at the 8th house, and then all of a sudden we notice that the moon is hemmed by malefics, and the moon is in the 8th house, and that in total he only has three signs occupied by planets, by real planets. So we feel it's a very aggressive masculine chart, violent and subversive. And that's what he becomes famous for, and his chart is more about that aggressive kind of confidence, masculine assertiveness. And the instability issue in Mussolini's chart has no counterbalance, so it's a very unstable fame that he had. A rise to fame and then a immediate decline to infamy. Third chart with the sun in the 10th house is Bernard Madoff, the financial thief. Very funny chart, really. The sun is in the 10th house. Okay, that just directs our attention to the 10th house. There's a lot of things in the 10th house. What's really more in the 10th house than the sun is Ketu and Venus, because they are at 27 to 30 degrees and his ascendant is at 29. So the closest thing to the cusp of the 10th house, cusp being the most essential point, which is 29 degrees, is Venus and Ketu. And that's very funny. That is Bernard Madoff. It's Venus Ketu in the 10th house. Ketu is very deceptive, and Venus signifies wealth, and the 10th house is very prominent and high up and also very fleeting. And Ketu in the 10th house, with the sun in the 10th house and the moon, it really highlights the instability potential of the sun in the 10th house. Finally, let's take a look at Vincent van Gogh. This is a very interesting chart. So his sun is in the 10th house in Aries, so it's exalted. So he should be very, very famous. And in fact, maybe we could say that he's the most famous of all the four people that we have up here. Now his 10th lord is in the 9th house with an exalted Venus. Exalted Venus means very artistic. So very famous in an artistic capacity. The sun is again with Mercury, as it usually is anywhere. It might seem odd that it's with Mercury so often, but it's not odd. Because Mercury never really gets more than 30 degrees away from the sun. The sun again in the 10th house is with Mercury. And in fact, just like Bernard Madoff had the sun in the 10th house, but really it's more about Ketu in the 10th house and Venus because they're closer to the ascendant degree. Similarly with Van Gogh, he has sun in the 10th house, but the real item in the 10th house, the dominant factor in the 10th house is Mercury because of how close it is to the sensitive degree of the 10th house. So Mercury is his third lord. First of all, Mercury is talented, dexterous, and expressive and intellectual. And second of all, it's the third lord, which has to do with hands. So the combination of all these things, that the 10th lord being conjoined to the exalted Venus, with the sun in the 10th house exalted, with Mercury as the dominant player in the 10th house as the third lord, you find a person that's very famous for their artistic hands. But Van Gogh, as much as he's famous for being an amazing painter, he's also famous for being a very depressive person. And so you can also very easily see that in his chart. Very unstable. The instability that's potential from the sun in the 10th house really is highlighted in this chart. Why? Because his first lord, Moon, is very, very closely conjoined Ketu, a node, in the 6th house with the 6th lord. So it's very unhappy to be in. 6th house is not a happy place. The 6th lord is not a happy lord. Ketu is not a stable planet. It's an unstable planet. Moon is not a stable planet. So Moon is his first lord with Ketu. That really highlights the instability. And being in the 6th house with the 6th lord, it's not very happy. And then on top of that, he has Saturn in the 11th house at 16 degrees when the ascendant is at 21. So Saturn is very strongly aspecting the ascendant from the 11th house. He's not a very happy person. If you want to actually have my interpretations for all of your placements in your chart, you can go to my website and order that from the charts page. It's victorcara.com/R2. Thank you so much.